Okay, hello everybody. Michelle and Anish here. Hi Anish.
Michelle, how are you?
Fine. Eggs are on the menu today.
They absolutely are. Not the eggs you want to eat.
Right. We're going to talk about this paper by, this blog post by Jason Fong.
Yeah.
Um, and Jason Fong is a nephrologist from Toronto, but he really, I don't know that he practices nephrology anymore. He's a quite famous uh, obesity guru right now. And I actually I heard about him recently before this particular blog post came out. I heard about him recently through uh, I'm in a Facebook group of other direct primary care doctors, and they mentioned him positively about his um, um, method of dieting. So he has an obesity book and program and a website, and he has a quite a large following, on social media and so forth. And he's in the camp that advocates, I don't know that he calls it the keto diet, but that sort of thing, very low carb and intermittent fasting. And so, and he's within the camp in the same camp as him are people like um, um, Gary. I'm blanking out on his last name.
Gary Tubbs.
Gary Tubbs, and Nina Teinholz, or right, and so forth. So he's in that camp, and he's quite successful. Of course, dieting is extremely, can be very controversial, and whatnot. And that sort of paleo, keto, low carb world has some overlap with alternative medicine practices and so forth. So he wrote this blog post, and it's a little bit of a convoluted blog post. I mean, it's hard to know exactly what he's driving at or what prompted the blog post. But I think at the end of a blog post, it seems that there was a paper, or yes, either a paper or at a conference, a scientific report of people saying, be careful with intermittent diet. It can be bad for your health. So I think that ticked him off and prompted him to a little go on the attack. But he's attacking the debunkers. He's attacking the group of people that our audience here may have heard about, who specialize in debunking alternative medicine and homeopathy. And so there's this entire website called Science-Based Medicine. I don't know if you're familiar with it. And there are people like so he mentions Timothy Caulfield from Atlanta, and Jennifer Gunther, and so forth. So he's attacking them. In a way, I think it's a defensive move to preempt any attack on on his diet method. So that that's the gist of the blog. So if I'm gonna I'll go through it through the blog here. He starts off the blog with it's kind of weird. He brings in the medieval crusades and says, so the first sentence is the medieval crusades were a series of holy wars sanctioned by the Latin Church. And it's strange that the Catholic religion, was used as justification to bring war and death, because, quote, last time I checked, the Bible did not exactly espouse the view of using brute force to subjugate other people. This first paragraph to me is kind of iffy in many different ways. But then he says, I'm reminded of this incongruity every time I read about, some person in the media trying to debunk some procedure or another. And then he cites Timothy Caulfield, who's one of the sort of famous debunkers, who has a large following about, he goes after alternative medicines, and especially when the alternative medicine is promoted by celebrities like Gwyneth Paltrow or and I think Tim Caulfield also. I went a little bit. I dug a little bit into his website, and he went after dieting gurus or dieting, what he calls dieting fads. There was a piece on Caulfield's website where he went after Tom Brady, because apparently, I didn't know that, but Tom Brady advocates some kind of extreme diet, and so Caulfield went after him at the same time as he was going after the Jade eggs, which are a big part of this blog post by Jason Fong. So Jason Fung says, there are these professional debunkers, and they claim to be scientific and to follow the evidence, but if you dig into it, they really don't, because on the one hand, yes, the claims of alternative medicines are unsubstantiated, but on the other hand, the counterclaims are unsubstantiated too. Also, so here he uses a famous example that was in the news. I don't know, maybe 6 months ago, perhaps a year ago. Gwyneth Paltrow has a website primarily about enhancing your sex life, and it's very geared towards alternative medicine and whatnot. And somebody on that website suggested that women can insert jade eggs into their private parts, and that would enhance their their sexual well-being and whatnot. And immediately it was opposed by the debunkers who debunked that. And so Jason Fung here brings that up by saying, well, of course, that practice is unsubstantiated, right? But on the other hand, for the debunkers to claim that the jade eggs don't work is also unsubstantiated. And in order to substantiate it, they would have to, conduct a clinical trial and blah, blah, blah. And so that's the meat of his article. And then he says, but besides that, there are many other things that were supposedly scientific that have been overturned. Then he makes he takes a jab at angioplasty and stents in stable coronary disease. And then he takes a jab at the scientific diet, or the diets that were promoted by the scientific establishment for a long time, that now everybody feels are have been poor and maybe responsible for the obesity epidemic and so forth. And so he says, all these professional debunkers who claim science, they may not be all that scientific all the time. And the bottom line for him, he says, that's the end of his blog. The bottom line is that people overlook the individual response to any kind of treatment, whether it's alternative or mainstream treatment. He says the main thing is how is it working for you personally? And he's talking primarily about dieting and his diet. And he says, besides just claiming that clinical trials show this or that. I mean, clinical trials the only thing they do is give you an idea of what happens on average, but what happens to the individual person? That's what's most important, and so that's the gist of it. Do you have anything else to add, or?
So do you think that argument? Do you think it's I'm confused by whether you think that's a net positive or?
Well, tell me what you think.
Thumbs up or thumbs down?
Tell me what you think. I think to me it's mitigated, but I was very interested by this, and there was an immediate response by the debunkers defending their debunking.
Yeah, I think there's certain points that Dr. Fung has that seem to hold water. Meaning, anyone who runs around saying they're certain about something is probably not somebody you should necessarily listen to. But I think he just gets carried away. I mean, I think he like, it's a mishmash of a blog that incorporates like tons of different things. And he does say in that thing that, yes, do I think jade eggs work? No. But do I know that jade eggs don't work? Who knows? How can we know?
Yeah, he leaves it open, right?
But yeah, why leave it open? Meaning that says that like that essentially takes clinicians like us, who essentially, whenever a patient comes to us, they tell us a story, we come up with some prior probability of what diagnosis they have. When we give them a therapy, we have some prior idea about what the therapy should or should not do to them based on something, right? That something 90% of the time is not based on some randomized controlled trial. So, I mean, he's essentially saying that you can't say anything about anything unless you have some type of EBM RCT or something like that. And then it's confusing because then he goes back and says something else that no, it doesn't matter. But anyway, but then he goes, he goes off the
deep end
path by then starting to talk about stents and stable CAD and how stents are recently completely debunked. And it's like, there's so many different places. Obviously, stents you know, I mean, if you that's a very strict interpretation of the recent trials, and that he's obviously just reading the New York Times articles, not digging deep into X, Y, and Z. So there's so much in it that just is not.
Yeah, correct. He goes after the debunkers at the end for not going after the mainstream special interests who have, or conflicts of interest, and not going after the mainstream pharmaceutical company that makes money off the opioid crisis, or cardiologists that make money off the stents and all that stuff, which is, I agree with you. I mean, it's, first of all, it's a little off topic from his initial point. And number two is actually, I don't think it's fair, because the debunkers have gone after the conflict of interest. I mean, I don't know exactly which among the debunkers have done that, but I think it's a distraction. But to go back to your question, I mean, how do we know that Jade eggs don't work?
Yeah, no, well, it would seem, well, what work to do? What work to? I mean, putting a stone in someone's private parts. I mean, do I need a lot of evidence suggests that that may not? I mean, if you want to do it, if you want to do it, and if you want to do it and pay me $65, I mean, I'll make some eggs and I'll sell it to people on the internet for $50. I mean, if they want to do it,
right? How many would buy from you if you did that?
How many would buy from me?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it depends on how I market. I mean, if I turn into some marketing, I mean, I'm Indian. We wrote the Kama Sutra a while ago, so I have some credibility there.
That's true. That's true.
But what is his? But I don't even understand. So he's saying, so yes, fine. So can we say whether intermittent fasting works or not? So he just thinks we should try things, and if they work, great. If they don't work,
Yeah, he's very vague. I mean, he's not clear at all, and I agree with you. But on the other hand, there is sometimes the debunkers do make the claim that you can't really rely on biological plausibility, or frequently they make the claim that biological plausibility is misleading, and therefore you shouldn't trust biological plausibility, and therefore everything should be subjected to an empirical trial.
Yeah.
Right. So
I thought this was them putting their best foot forward, because our problem is frequently that folks are very absolute when it comes to EBM, and they disregard bioplausibility. And here you have one of the folks that is EBM, one of the EBM gurus, or somebody who I thought bioplausibility was not very important. Here they're kind of forced to go towards bioplausibility to say that.
So here you're talking about the rebuttal by
David Gorski.
By David Gorski. So David Gorski wrote a rebuttal shortly after Jason Fong published his blog.
Right.
And that rebuttal, we'll put a link to it.
Yeah.
So what did you think about his rebuttal?
I mean, I thought he made a lot of good points. I mean, an EBM guy is talking about bioplausibility. So to me, it was great. I was like, this is awesome. Yes, bioplausibility is important.
Right. It's how refreshing. But happy to see it. That's interesting. But I need to make a full disclosure, because I have, I may have a conflict of interest here when talking about Dr. Gorski. Several years ago, not several years ago, well, I think it was 3 years ago, I had just started getting on Twitter. And I didn't know the first thing about the debunkers and all these people, all that group of people. I knew nothing about this website called Science-Based Medicine, of which David Gorski is, either a founder or a major editor in, or writer for. And one time I was on Twitter, and I see I see somebody making, criticizing very virulently the Mayo Clinic for promoting. I can't remember if it was some kind of bizarre alternative stuff. So the Mayo Clinic was promoting on Twitter energy therapy. So he said, now the Mayo Clinic offers energy therapy. So immediately one of these guys, lashed out. This is crazy. It's not evidence-based medicine, and blah blah blah. So I said, who cares? I mean, it's, people like it, they find it helpful. It probably doesn't hurt, to have these magnets or whatever, who cares? Why go after them? And I had no idea that they are actually, these guys, I mean, that's really their mission, is to, eradicate alternative and pseudoscience. I mean, that's what they're after. They're after pseudoscience. So So that was a claim by the Mayo Clinic. You know, they were supporting pseudoscience, so it had to be squashed immediately. So I was surprised by the reaction that my tweet got. So we got into a little Twitter fight, and actually at the end I made a big blog post out of it. And my blog post had to do with because we talked about this. I'm very much against licensing. And the licensing battles back, 100 years ago were very much along the lines of the establishment medical wanting to, put out of business all the alternative guys and calling them pseudoscientific and so forth. And then they called on the state and the government to give, monopoly, a cartel to the establishment, the quote unquote, the so-called scientific medicine people. So my blog post was, the title of it was, is medicine a scientific enterprise? And I think it's a very, very important point because people get confused. I don't want to make it part of this this episode here, but medicine really is not a scientific enterprise. Science is about, discovering truth and, universal truth about the way things work and, the way that maybe the human body works and so forth. But medicine really is about helping people individually. Right, so it's the focus is very different. Now, of course, I'm of the belief that if you want to help people individually, science is extremely important, right? But it still does not make science. It does not make medicine a scientific enterprise per se. And so I wrote that blog post and I talk about the history of licensing and the problems that have come out of it. And in response to my blog post, David Gorski, just attacked me in science-based medicine. And I read, I wrote a long thing. And so I'll say something here that, so I read the thing that I started reading what he wrote about me. And what struck me is it was overbearing. It was boring. He has a style of just going on and on, it was kind of a drone. I didn't, normally when somebody writes about you, even if it's negative, you're kind of interested. You want to see what's going on. I was really bored to death about what he wrote about me. And I have the same feeling about what he wrote here, trying, to debunk Jason Fung. It's this drone about, we are science and the rest is pseudoscience and whatnot. But I think he has no clue, and these guys have no clue about what science is and what science is not. And I say that because, to go back to your question here, when he says, well, we know Jason, we know Jade eggs don't work because it conflicts with the laws of physics and chemistry. What do you think about that argument? Because he makes that argument. I mean, that's what he says, right? Essentially, if I go back to this,
honestly, I haven't thought much of the bioplausibility of jade eggs.
Right.
But, it seemed to be putting stones. It seems to me there's some precautionary principle that violates. So in general, I think it's probably not a bad idea not to put foreign substances into our oral cavities. But I mean, right? So that because you know physics and chemistry. I mean, is it the knowledge of physics and chemistry that draws you to the conclusion? Because for him, that's the claim that he makes, is that he says, so on the one hand he says, yes, we are empiricists and we want things to be tested, but putting jade eggs in your vagina is so far off, and it's far off because physics and chemistry has demonstrated, so we don't need to reinvent the wheel, right? So he's appealing to the modern science of physics and chemistry, right? Something that has emerged since the 17th century or 16th, 17th century. Well, which to me is ridiculous, because I can tell you for sure that, in the medieval period, before science emerged, people would have thought of this as completely bunk. Well, not all of them, but a large portion of people would have thought this is bunk. And the reason people go for jade eggs. Go ahead. Say what you have to say, because I want to go on a little tirade here. I mean, but once we get beyond this precautionary principle of don't take healthy people and what nature has evolved over whatever millions of years, and start doing strange stuff to it. Meaning, if nature had wanted a stone in your vagina, I think we would all have stones or whatever growing in the vagina. But meaning it gets to the question of why. Why is that, right? And so that's where he may be coming up with. That's why he's invoking some type of science. So maybe I don't know what exactly jade eggs are made of. They're not an actual egg, right? It's a stone or it's an egg. I have no idea.
I think it's right. I think it's a stone. I mean, as far as I know, it's one of these, right? These
Right.
Polished
So
stone
maybe
eggs.
maybe the stone has maybe the idea that the stone is porous and can harbor bacteria, which grows, which then can change the background pH of the vagina, which can lead you to infections. And that appeal. That's the appeal, right? I mean, I don't know why he's saying physics. I don't know what physics has to do with jade eggs.
Well, but I mean, that's because there are two. I mean, they have two rebuttals against the Jade eggs claim. One is that we know that it doesn't work because of physics and chemistry, and number two, we know that it's harmful because we know about fomites and we know about bacteria. Okay.
Yeah, well, yeah. So, I mean, that's not a bad one. What's wrong with that argument, Michelle? I mean, maybe why can't bacteria grow on something? And
okay, no. I think I accept that. I mean, I think it could potentially be harmful. Although I mean, who knows?
But we may have to do a whole separate blog post on the physics of jade eggs. So
no, but my point here is that we know that jade eggs is bunk not because we've studied physics and chemistry, right? And I can tell you that people, in the year 1000 or in antiquity would also have thought that putting jade eggs in your vagina was bunk. And so the appeal of jade eggs, so the problem here is that they're trying to counter the appeal of, they're trying to counter the claim of jade eggs on a physicalist, scientific.
How do you counter these things?
Right. So the appeal of jade eggs is not because of the naturalistic physicalist, but it's because it's an occult power. I mean, if you go to the website of the jade eggs, it's all about occult powers. So it's all about these, mystical occult powers that are channeled somehow. So it's kind of silly in my mind to counter what is obviously an appeal to the occult by saying, well, no, we're going to counter the occult because we know physics and chemistry. I mean, that's why it's kind of silly. So if that's his bioplausibility argument, I mean, it's not really a bioplausibility. I mean, it is, but it's not. It misses the point. Right.
But there are a lot of practices that were done.
Yes, and many
which are when they how were those rebutted? Meaning a lot of people, for religious reasons, for the head priest would say this is what must be done.
Correct.
Genital mutilations happens to this day.
Yeah, I agree, and they're terrible. So but many of them they appeal to the occult, and we reject the occult, right? We reject the occult, and But this is where it needs to be. It's on that level that it should be rejected, not on the naturalistic level, because the people who buy these eggs will say, okay, yes, I know rationally. They will say, yes, of course, I know that physics, there's no sort of physical mechanism, but I'm getting the egg because there's, and if you read the blog post about the jade eggs, that's what it appeals to. It appeals to these mystical powers.
If a patient of yours wants to use a jade egg, what would you tell them?
So you have to, I think you have to be careful, because you have to understand why they're using it. And if they are using it because that's what they're drawn to, the occult, or then it means that they have, they have a need, or they have, that is unfulfilled, or they have, they're yearning for something, and it indirectly expresses itself, via the use of the, so then I may steer the conversation. I mean, it's difficult because I'm the doctor. I'm not their priest, right? So I have to. But if they try to engage me on the physical level, yes, I will answer physically. That will say, that physically this is very, implausible. And I would still say implausible because it's not. You cannot say with absolute certainty, even if you invoke physics and chemistry, that it doesn't work. I mean, it's conceivable that, the pressure of the weight on the walls of, there might be some hormones that have not yet been discovered. I mean, who knows? I mean, I'm not saying it's possible, not plausible. I think it's possible. Conceivable is conceivable, but I wouldn't believe it. And I would also use the argument against fomites. I mean, I think that's a valid argument.
What separates doctors in 2018 from priests in 1200s?
Well, there was a. I mean, it depends where. It depends where. So I know that in the West there was a distinction, right? So you had doctors were frequently priests, at least in Europe, in the medieval period, frequently, but their scientific, I mean, their work as doctors was not mystical, right?
Mm.
And in fact, the West embraced Hippocrates, right? The West
Right.
embraced, and that includes the West, broadly speaking. It includes Muslim doctors and Jewish doctors. So they were not invoking spiritual powers when they were acting as doctors. Okay, even though they were believers, or even if the doctors were happened to be religious. In fact, they were not frequently. They were religious brothers, at least in the Catholic West.
Right.
So there was a distinction that could be made, and that we ought to make between the occult and the natural, and and that's this is why I think it's kind of silly. Go ahead. Yeah.
Aren't we damaging our brand by trading in the occult, or meaning how do we differentiate ourselves as, like, so you were saying doctors are not men of science. That's not a appropriate way to think about it.
No, that's not true. No. I mean, we obviously need to know science, and we believe in nature and natural laws, right? The laws of nature. So we need to understand those as they pertain to other human beings. I think that's very important. So no, not at all. Don't misunderstand me. But we're not scientists. We're not scientists. Our goal is not to, to advance science. Our goal is to make the patient in front of us feel better, and that's
interesting, because then that means there are many ways to make patients feel better.
Yeah, correct. That many ways. That's right.
Snake oil makes people feel better, but do we want to necessarily prescribe snake oil because it makes people feel better?
No. And so our goal is not just to make them feel better. I think now you're putting me on the spot, but I think our goal is health. So it requires us to be explicit about our concepts of health, but we're not. I mean, the scientific medicine that the people that science-based medicine seems to vaunt is not explicit at all about what it conceives health to be. And I think that's a very interesting question. It interests me a lot, but I think you can't invoke science because science doesn't really tell you anything about health. Health is not a scientific concept. If you view science primarily as physics and chemistry, there's nothing there that tells you what health is. So health is going to require a philosophical baggage that the hard-nosed skeptics, because they also call themselves skeptics, the hard-nosed skeptics are going to be very uncomfortable with. And I think it's at some level, people, doctors ought to be explicit, and that's why when doctors took the oath of Hippocrates, in a way, they were making a claim about a certain understanding about health that once licensing came about, and the oath of Hippocrates essentially fell by the wayside, that's been in a way lost. But I think it's essential. So you bring up a good point. I mean, I think it has to do with health.
Essentially, we want to say. Obviously, Gwyneth Paltrow has probably brought much more joy to many men and women. Much more joy to
right,
men.
and perhaps in the short term. So I wouldn't agree with that. I wouldn't promote that. I wouldn't send my patients to her website, because I think you have to be careful about short-term gain. So, I have a certain view about the health of the human person. And it shouldn't be just in the immediate well-being. I don't equate it with well-being,
right.
And therefore one has to be careful about that. It's go ahead.
Do you think Jason Fung, intermittent fasting and what he does, is that? I was confused by his blog in terms of what he So what is his? So anything that works essentially for him, anything that works for a patient is good. So he's essentially attempting to debunk RCTs and bioplausibility.
Yeah, I'm not sure. So I just ordered his book just to read it. So he has a book called The Obesity Code.
Yeah.
I think he understands. I mean, he makes scientific claims the same way that Gary Taubes and these people make certain, they have a certain idea
Yeah.
about metabolism and so forth. And
Yeah.
I don't know if you know, but as far as metabolism is concerned, I'm a complete relativist. So far, I have no opinion. And in that sense, I agree with him, because for me, what works for the patient or the person is very important when it comes to diet and metabolism. Now he thinks he has a secret sauce, and maybe his secret sauce works for a lot of people, but maybe it doesn't work for everybody. And I don't know whether he thinks that it works for everybody or whether he thinks that it works for certain people, and therefore he pushes it for the people for whom it works. All this is kind of there's a lot of nuance, and I don't know where he stands on all these things. But I'm intrigued, and I'm intrigued just because other colleagues have said good things about it, and I want to be familiar at least with this, because a lot of patients come to me and say, well, I'm on this and I'm trying that, and I at this point I don't have really the first clue about
no, I'm totally with you.
These things are about.
We see such a wide variety of patients when it comes to nutrition and diet. I don't know if I don't think there is such a thing as nutritional science.
Correct. And that's
so that would have been a much stronger piece, if I had to advise Dr. Fung, not that he needs advice from me, but he should have focused on that part of it, right? And
correct. I think but to go back to the bioplausibility, so he's accusing the debunkers of being duplicitous. He calls them hypocritical, but being duplicitous, and in a way they are, because the rebuttal where David Gorski says no, we believe in bioplausibility, I don't buy it at all, because perhaps they believe it, but they believe it when it's convenient, and they don't believe it when it's convenient. Right? They don't have they'll speak out of both sides of their minds, but the science that they the notion of science that they espouse, these debunkers, is really the best that I can tell, is the traditional science of empiricism that was started essentially philosophically by Francis Bacon. So Francis Bacon is the one who said, forget first principles. Forget first principles. Anything needs to be subjected to empirical inquiry. Right? And that's the beginning. That was 17th century, and that is still alive. And I think that's really what they believe. And they bring out the bioplausibility when it suits them. And here I think even if they bring it out here, I think they miss the point, because it has nothing to do with bioplausibility. Why people embrace alternative medicine of this kind. So it's really if it's the science of Bacon, and I'm insisting on talking about Bacon here because I thought about I want this episode to be called Eggs and Bacon or Jade, Eggs and Bacon. so there.
There's certainly some interesting points that he makes, but it does make. I was happy with the whole back and forth, because it essentially forced a group of folks that I think are a little too straight and narrow when it comes to EBM and RCTs and data to be forced to their only recourse in terms of battling, homeopathic stuff that doesn't have evidence for or against is to point to blind plausibility. So,
Right. So David Gorski, he says, no, well, of course we believe in bioplausibility, and then he makes a distinction between science-based medicine versus evidence-based medicine. He said, no, science-based medicine is more global, and it includes bioplausibility and so forth. But
you should like that, Michel. This is exactly what we talk about. No?
But he doesn't define. If you can't corner these guys, because really when they're going after what they call pseudoscience, I don't know if have you heard of what's called the demarcation problem in philosophy?
No.
The demarcation problem is the problem of really defining what is science and what is pseudoscience. And really you can't. That's been examined at, in the middle 20th century, Karl Popper. There was a group of people called the positivists and the neo-positivists in the 19th century and early 20th century that claimed that you can really distinguish science from non-science, and that was critiqued successfully, so that they had to come up with alternative arguments. So Karl Popper said, no, well, science is really for a proposition to be a scientific proposition, it has to be falsifiable. So it's called falsifiabilism and so forth. But even that doesn't work. So there's really no way of distinguishing pseudoscience objectively distinguishing. I mean, at least explicitly distinguishing pseudoscience from science, meaning for something to be science, it has to satisfy, these criteria, and pseudoscience, it's the opposite and so forth. You really can't do that. And
This is one of those
and
things.
so long as they don't do that, or they don't know how to handle the distinction, then I think they
you would take the
nonsense.
stance it's something you either know or you don't know. So if you see it, you know it as science, or you don't.
Or you don't know. Oh, well, I
because how do you have to trust? You have to
correct. That's my bigger philosophical project. That maybe in the future I'll share with you and the audience. But I think, but you can know, but you need philosophy, and you need metaphysical principles of the philosophy of nature that will allow you to say, yes, I know that it doesn't work, without having to deal with empirical bioplausibility or empirical verification or empirical refutation. Because right now this is essentially the mix that you have. You have either you're gonna say, well, we know from the laws of physics that it doesn't work, or we know from by testing it under experimentation that it doesn't work, or that it works, and so forth. So that's, but yeah.
So the battle, so the continued battle against empiricism. That
yeah, correct. That's my battle, my cross to carry over the next few years. Are we done with the omelet? So. The omelet here?
Yes, eggs and bacon.
Okay, sounds good. Okay. I'll see you next time, Anish.
Yep.
All right, bye.
There we